The American media has a system. They are influenced by Israel AIPAC, and influenced by Israeli leaders who are loyal to Israel, who are Americans and live in America, but their hearts and their way of thinking is with Israel. So they influence the media because of their positions, because of their power, because of their media, because of their writings, daily writing.
The Palestinian people don't have billions, don't have weapons. Their power and the strength lies in the truth. And that's why the Israeli occupation government murdered the Palestinian journalist Shireen Abuakleh, believing that killing the messenger would stop the message. But the Palestinian community in the United States and elsewhere, and the activists who support justice for Palestine, pledged to keep the Palestinian message across the world. To talk more about that, I have with me via Skype from New York, Mr. Maher Abdelqader, member of the U.S. Palestine Council. Welcome to our program, Mr. Maher.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Maher, the Israeli occupation government murdered Shireen Abuakleh, the well-known Palestinian journalist, and many journalists before, to stop the Palestinian message. But what we saw yesterday in the world, including in New York, the demonstration organized by the Palestinian community there, and the activists who support justice for Palestine, shows that Israel is a big failure. Tell us about that rally and its message.
Number one, what Israel did is a real crime, assassinating a person such as Shireen Abuakleh, who continuously went and documented Israel's attack and illegal aggression against the Palestinian civilians. Israel doesn't like that. They don't like their efforts to be documented in a negative way. So they decided during their aggression at Jenin to assassinate Shireen Abuakleh. And this assassination of a key person who's known worldwide and dedicated her life, or 25 years of her life, to show in her capacity as a journalist the crimes committed by Israel. It resonates in America, it resonates in the whole world, and her killing was a major event. In the United States, at the very beginning, the media and the politician tried to cover this heinous crime by stating that, repeating the Israeli story that she was killed as a result of crossfire between Israeli forces, and they refer to the Palestinian as terrorists. Now, yes, this was a major responsibility on Palestinian activists, community leaders, and Palestinian organizations. Immediately after the incident, the way the Palestinian people reacted in Palestine, it's in Palestine, from the river to the sea, okay, the community here immediately reacted by start making phone calls, organizing talk shows, and going to talking to the media, and also going to the street via demonstrations. Yesterday there were two demonstrations, one in New Jersey and another one in New York, in Manhattan, that started in front of the New York Times to show the American media that they are biased and they have double standards against Palestinians. And we ended it at the Israeli consulate. Tomorrow there will be about 4 to 5 demonstrations in the U.S., from Texas to New Jersey, and there will be one in Detroit and a major one in Washington, D.C. So to answer your questions, yes, the Palestinian community is active and becoming more and more active to show the American the real story behind the killing of Shireen Abuakleh and the Israeli daily aggression and daily killing of the Palestinians, so the American will be educated.
Yes, and Mr. Maher, the demonstration or the rally that was organized yesterday in New York, it was organized beside or in front of the offices of the New York Times. And we know that the way the New York Times newspaper reported on the killing of Shireen was unfair. So did your message get across to the reporters, to the editors, to the executives of the New York Times?
I think, we demonstrated in front of their buildings, and, they have employees back and forth, and we had loudspeakers, and we are confident, that many of their employees heard this. But you see, the American media has a system. They are influenced by Israel AIPAC, and influenced by Israeli leaders who are loyal to Israel, who are Americans and live in America, but their hearts and their way of thinking is with Israel. So they influence the media because of their positions, because of their power, because of their media, because of their writings, daily writing. So yes, our message got to the New York Times. And yes, it was covered by social media a lot, but still, this is just a small dent, in what we do with regards to the American media. American media historically, all right, been loyal to Israel, and always when there's anything happening in the Middle East, they just talk about it in one sentence or two sentences, and immediately followed by the Israeli talking points that Hamas did this, the rockets that being fired against Israeli citizens, the killings of Israeli here, there, injury, and they avoid talking and mentioning that Israeli soldiers did this or Israeli government did that, or settlers did this and that. So they cover on Israel, and they try to highlight the talking point of the Israeli government, so they don't tell the truth, in another word, to the people. So yes. Did our message get to New York Times? Definitely it did. Is it going to make a difference? I don't think it's going to make a big difference in the immediate time, but they start recognizing the effect of our movement in America. They start recognizing that we have 600,000 Palestinians. They started to be vocal, and we are, all over in the streets, social media, making phone calls, writing letters, signing petition, etc., etc. Because of this sum of extensive work right now, they started recognizing it, and they starting spending more time and effort, all right, to fight it back and cover it. But as one poll revealed a while ago, that 35% of America start understanding the Palestinian side of the story and start sympathizing with Palestinian. It doesn't mean that they are with us against Israel.
Yes, if we connect the American and the Western media coverage of the Palestinian suffering under the Israeli occupation and compare that to how they cover the Russian-Ukraine crisis, they are very much criticized by many activists, many institutions around the world, because hypocrisy and bias is very apparent. Don't you think now, in order to show the people that they are different and they try to be even-handed in handling crises around the world, whether in Ukraine or Palestine, they would change their direction, their attitude, and fair enough cover the suffering and the catastrophic conditions that the Palestinians are going through under the Israeli occupation?
You see, they recognize, I don't think so, first of all. There is no balance, in covering the Palestinian side versus Israel. And Ukraine war with Russia is a good example. If you go to CNN, 80 to 90% of their news is about Ukraine. They visit families, they bring in, wives with kids, and they show killed people in the streets, and they show dramatic stories. Dramatic stories. So this media that covers 80%, when there is like a killing of Israeli people on Palestinian, they said, there are clashes between the Israelis and the Palestinians. There are riots in Jenin, for example, and the Israeli police wanted to suppress these riots, even though Israel is the invader. So to answer your question, this unbalance of portraying Israel always as the victim and the Palestinian and everybody else in the Middle East as the aggressor. Okay.
Yes.
And this will not end, soon. But I think our persistent and continuous work will force them one day or another to change, and that's why they are afraid. That's why they are afraid.
Yes, but if we talk about the way they covered the assassination of the Palestinian journalist Shireen Abuakleh by the Israeli occupation soldiers in Jenin refugee camp, the moment she was assassinated, the coverage was different from the moment her funeral entered into Jerusalem, when the Israeli occupation police and forces attacked the coffin, the casket, and it was about to drop off the shoulders of the pallbearers. Did you observe any difference between reporting at the moment of assassination and at the moment of holding the casket in Jerusalem?
Yeah, I think you bring an excellent point. Number one, when she was assassinated, American media stated that she was killed as a result of a crossfire between Israeli police and terrorists. So they did not. They gave coverage and protection for the state of Israel. Later on, the story start changing little by little, by stating that there was an error and mistake, and Israel will investigate it. It's like the entity that killed and caused the killing and the assassination, they want to investigate. Investigate what? And they came up and they say it's very, very hard to identify, where that bullet came from. So, they still, trying to modify the story with regard to Israel to protect the image of the Israel. And a good example on, the progress of coverage, to answer your question, let's just refer to three statements by three entities in the United States. Number one is, I think the best one is Senator Elizabeth Warren. She came up with a very strong statement, and she said, killing an attack by Israel forces is an attack in democracy, and democracy is the cornerstone of American democracy. So you see, she had indicated and mentioned Israel, but she did not blame Israel.
Yes.
Okay. She did not strongly, when they talk about the Palestinian, they say Palestinian terrorists, the Palestinian rioters, the Palestinian clashed and caused this and caused that. And they try to humanize the Israeli side by saying civilian got hurt, somebody injured, somebody was stabbed, things like that. Now let's go to Blinken, who we applied so much pressure and things. Ultimately, when he saw the casket, the Israeli forces attack the mourner at the Shireen Abuakleh funeral, what did he say? He said he was troubled by the images and by the scenery that the Israeli police trying to push them Palestinian during the funerals. He did not blame Israel. He did not say she was killed, she was assassinated, and implying that he was trouble, all right? Another congressman stated that everyone has the right to be buried with dignity, all right? And what the police did is unacceptable. So, but you see, they are minimizing it to an action of a police, but it's not the action of just the police. This is an action, all right, by the rightist government of Israel that has a policy, okay, a policy to harass Palestinian, to kill Palestinian, to push Palestinian back. And as I recall, a statement by Sami Abu Shahada, who visited lately the United States of America. He said, Israel left 3% of the land in 1948 area. And if they do a project, water project, sewer project, anything, or military exercise, they choose an area from the 3%. And the objective of it is to harass the Palestinian, minimize their presence and push them away. So Israel is persistent in their discriminatory policies and laws, to humiliate, punish, penalize, kill, push the Palestinian away. And America is supporting Israel financially, with weapons, and within the media. So to answer your question, this event, which started in Jenin by assassinating Shireen Abuakleh, to the minute that she was the funeral and she was buried, it got so much attention in the world, and American media and American politicians couldn't avoid mentioning it or talking about it. But when they talk about it carefully and with caution, not to blame Israel or criticize Israel. But this is going to be changed because social media is so powerful and lately has been knocking at Americans' doors and say, wake up, smell the coffee. Israel is victimizing the Palestinian, and Palestinians have rights, and they should have their liberty and freedom. And that's what worries America and worries Israel, that there are strong voices in the West, especially in the United States, that starts talking about how horrible Israel and how horrible Israel treats the Palestinians.
Yes, Mr. Maher, and it is the duty of all the Palestinians who live in the diaspora in the West and all the justice-loving people to ensure that the message of the Palestinians get across and to confirm that Shireen Abuakleh was killed by the Israeli weapons that are funded by the money of the taxpayers of the United States. Maher Abdelqader, Palestinian-American activist, member of the U.S. Palestine Council. It has been a great pleasure having you on our program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I really thank you for this opportunity. And I'm telling you one thing, our Palestinian community, especially in the United States or the rest of the world in diaspora, they are really a strong, powerful, passionate people, and they start, making a dent and a difference in Western media and Western political establishments. And I believe that at one point or another, our story will be told the way it's supposed to be told. It's going to take a little bit of time. Our enemies, Israel, and the supporters of Israel are very strong, but our people are so strong also because they have that determination and the will to stand behind the just cause of Palestine, and Palestine will win ultimately.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Maher. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. And from you, Usama Nazal. Have a nice time.